If you could benefit from a good basic primer on traditionalist/perennialist concepts, then this book will be very good for you. Stay tuned. Welcome to Biblical Cultists, where I review books that I find interesting in the topics of religion, philosophy, history, and fiction. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, and comment on the video. I really appreciate your support. In this episode, I'm going to go over The Path of the Warrior Mystic by Angel Millar, and this particular edition is from Inner Traditions, published in 2021. Now, like I said in the intro, this book is really good for people who are not necessarily very familiar with the traditionalist school and are more actually inclined towards the New Age movement and the kind of work that tends to compile or take a lot of very complex ideas and issues and place them in a very nice, easy format. Now, when I say New Age, in this particular case, this book is not really technically New Age, in the sense that it is actually advocating for what people would call traditionalist conceptions of spirituality and social ethics, etc. But the attempt itself is in the realm of New Age, and a lot of times these books end up in that place even if they don't want to be. But let me go through it. So first, the author goes into the ancient mindset, how it was not really a tabula rasa, blank slate conception, but that human beings had a soul, a nature, and then this nature was unchanging, an eternal aspect of the self. And this is absolutely true. The ancient world could not even conceive of a being that had no background, no context. And if you think about it, it is a very strange idea. And most modern people still believe in this notion that human beings, when they're born free of any context and without any influence. And I think the reason for this is because the modernist religion is absolutely obsessed with the idea that you can be whatever you want to be. And if that is the case, being born with a set nature implies a lack of free will. So most of this stems from the postmodern conception of life, that you should be able and can be able to just perceive your way or feel your way through existence and even modify basic realities. But no one saw the world this way. Not even the sophists, who were relativists in the ancient Greek world. The author also goes into the dual nature of the warrior, that the warrior tended to be two extremes, compassionate and ruthless. And because the author accepts and believes in the neo-Darwinian theory of evolution, he uses that presupposition to argue that human beings have the largest brain and the largest genitals of any primate, basically making the argument that these particularities exemplify the duality in human beings, the strong struggle between the rational and the emotional, or the instinct versus the logos. I found it interesting that Millar quotes Yukio Mishima, arguing that words can be corrosive, that because language itself represents concepts and ideas, it leads to an abstraction of reality. And of course, this is a very interesting conception, especially because that great Japanese poet had a very Zen conception of action and the necessity of action. But the fact that words do abstract and conceptualize shouldn't necessarily mean that everything becomes relativized, because language is really simply grasping reality and trying to somehow manifest it with symbols. But I believe that you can do both without necessarily destroying the other. The book also discusses how the architecture of rules and rituals found in man and religion creates a psychic connection to something beyond the self, to the stream of eternity and existence, that modern people tend to shy away from collective manifestations of rituals and even criticize very difficult rules and regulations on how to do things, on the proper way of behaving, especially in a ritualized fashion, and correctly points out that this aspect of the psyche in human beings is very important as well. As a matter of fact, those that know about dogs, for example, realize that dogs need ritual, they need repetition and structure, and it actually makes them happier in the sense that they are more functional and healthier when they have a structured way of eating and sleeping and functioning. And chaos breeds unhappiness on a dog, for example. And there have been many experiments on other animals as well. And I don't think human beings are different in the sense that we also benefit from ritual, discipline, and structure. Now, there is a point in the book where the author makes the blanket statement that ideologies are somehow unnatural because they attempt to explain everything, but that in practice they are incapable of working somehow. But as I've mentioned before, people that tend to make this argument are themselves making an ideological statement. So it becomes a weird circle because the argument is, ideologies don't work because they're attempting to explain something that doesn't have an explanation, or it's chaotic and it's restrictive or unnatural. But that argument in itself is an ideological argument. The statement, for example, that there is no truth is a truth claim itself. And this is usually very common in the New Age circles where they fall into an affirmation through a denial, and it goes on and on and on. Now, the author also explores the biological and mystical differences between men and women. This is very typical of the traditional school, that they would go into the biology of hormones and how women develop their self-identity through their menstrual cycles and how they're connected to the moon and waxing and waning, and how men develop hormonally through a different process, the solar aspect of man, and how men require work and discipline and strength to develop themselves into manhood. And all of this then is connected to a very mystical, spiritual reality that they see beyond just simple matter. And I think I've always found that to be a very powerful and beautiful way of trying to understand sexual dynamics. It definitely is a lot better than the transactional, materialistic way that most of these things are seen today. Now, the book also cites a study about the importance of ancestors, how human beings tend to perform better an intellectual task if they think about their ancestors before doing said act. And they perform better doing this than thinking of anything else. That the focus on ancestors and the focus on legacy has quite a deep impact on human beings. And again, this is a very classic, traditional way of understanding that has been eroded with modernity. Because again, it's connected to the tabula rasa, to the blank slate. It doesn't matter what my ancestors did. It doesn't matter who my parents are. I am my own person. I do whatever I want, etc. That mentality eradicates the connection to the past. But our connection to the past is inevitable, not only because we are a physical manifestation of our past, we are conditioned by the history and the culture from which we come from. And denying this is a form of insanity. Now, Millar argues that the world is chaos, but then he argues that it might be chaos, but it is also meaningful. And this is one of those points in the work that I tend to find in most modern books that deal with this very deep topic, because it is difficult to really put a lot of these ideas in one single book. Most of these topics require an entire book, and these books already do exist, because these are philosophical conceptions of existence and ontology, metaphysics, etc. So trying to put it all in a book, I understand, is difficult, but arguing that the world is somehow chaos, but at the same time meaningful, it seems to be somewhat oxymoronic. But even the exploration of this is impossible in a single book. Now, the book quotes the Bible to argue that man is a whole and not really a component of parts. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of the work, because by integrating the biblical conception of Adam, naming the animals and not really naming the parts of the animals, right? So he doesn't say, oh, here's a bone, here's a spleen, here are the organs, etc. But he goes, this is a wolf, this is an elephant, etc. He is presenting an ontology, a way of seeing a being. What is it? And how is it composed? It's a holistic view. And this is a very important reality of the ancient world, that there was an integrated, holistic understanding of existence. And it doesn't only apply to a unit like an animal, but that the animal was part of a family, of a line, and that at the end of it all, we were all connected through God. So it was a diversity within unity. And it actually didn't require an evolutionary point of view, which is interesting from a philosophical point of view, because it was not necessary to believe that we were all bacteria at some point. It didn't look further down into the past, but it looked beyond time to our existence and our connection to the source of all existence. Now, I found it curious that for some reason the book argues that we have to be cautious about impressions. In Sanskrit, this is called samskara, that whatever we perceive affects our soul, it taints our existence, and therefore, whether positive or negative, we have to be cautious of what we consume, of the movies that we watch, the music that we listen to, etc. And I actually agree with that 100%. But then he argues that anything that causes stress or sadness should be eliminated because it disturbs our sense of self. But the traditional school never really saw it that way. I think this is a point in the book in which he departs from the main ideological framework that he has been presenting, because for the traditionalist, struggle and stress and conflict is a major part of development as a human being, and especially as a man. So if we try to shield ourselves from stressful and sad and conflictive situations, we cannot develop. When you read the book, you can make your own decision of whether or not that makes sense in the context of the entire work. Now, I'm going to cite an anecdote in the book that I actually found very, very meaningful. And the author does present a lot of different anecdotes from different religions that are important to open up your mind and open up your sense of history and philosophy and ideological framework. So here's the quote. There is a story associated with Islamic chivalry that illustrates the romantic role of death in the male psyche. Accordingly, one day in the midst of battle, Ali, the Lion of Allah, was confronted by a handsome young warrior. Seeing him approach, sword in hand, and realizing how the young man would surely fail to kill him, Ali felt pity for the young man and called out to him, warning him that he would be killed if he continued his approach. Why, Ali asked, would he want that? The young man called back, saying that he had fallen in love with a young woman. She would be his if he succeeded in killing the Lion of Allah she had promised. And if he died, there could be no better reason to die than for love, the young man said. And at least he would be free of the love sickness he felt. Moved by his words, Ali let his sword fall to the ground, took off his helmet, and exposed his neck, sacrificing himself to the young man. But upon seeing Ali's action, the young man's love for the woman was transferred to Ali and the Prophet of Islam. So that's a beautiful anecdote, very likely not a historically accurate anecdote, but still a beautiful sentiment and a very poetic presentation of Ali and his personality and the reason why many Muslims love him. And also it presents a notion of love in the context of war, which I think is actually beautiful. And it is a very good manifestation of the traditionalist point of view. So again, to close out the review, the book is a very simple but thick presentation of classic traditionalist viewpoints on masculinity, love, war, social interactions, and the history in general of how ancient religions viewed these topics. So a book like this I would have really benefited from, especially when I was an 18-year-old kid or 17-year-old kid who was trying to somehow learn about these concepts. It would have been very beneficial because it would have given me a lot of topics to further go into on my own. So I think this book really works in that position. I don't think the book is enough to go into the topics. It's an introductory work to encourage you to then go further and beyond. So hopefully you enjoyed the review. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, and comment on the video. I really appreciate it. So thank you for being with me. See you next time.